Hello, this is Blair Stanislao with the Happy Lion Center. Welcome to our podcast, Mystical and Infamous, where we have playful and easy conversations about anything mystical, getting to the heart of all things strange and weird. Join us in a bit of magical tomfoolery, spreading the alchemy of love and light. And now, we invite you to enjoy the show.
Honestly, like the Care Bear stare. Do you remember those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's what it felt like to me. It was like you were describing using these geometric forms and, shooting the energy through to that recipient. But then you said, I don't need it anymore. So, and I had a dream that kind of touched on this. So I'd like you to, if you don't mind, you can talk about whatever you want, but I do want you to make sure that you touch on that part, because the reason being is that seems like it's really important for people to understand that they can actually take in whatever method or whatever it is that they need to take in. It can become a part of them. And then it doesn't have to be like it's constant searching.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
okay, so tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do first.
Okay. Yeah. So I live in New Zealand. So this little sliver of landmass that we call a country in New Zealand. And I am, it's hard, this is something that I always find really evolving, right? This kind of, how do I define myself? And I'm someone that always loves to take something and evolve it, right? And move with it and change it accordingly, because I think that's what life's all about, right? As we grow, we learn, right? So I call myself Ascendance Quantum Healer, which obviously I'm an intuitive practitioner. And obviously I've got a number of things that are associated with that too. I call myself a reality coach, because I'm all about the individual understanding their reality in a greater way, with a greater insight, which also will establish a greater insight into themselves as well, who they are. I always say when we connect into our authenticity, we can then connect into the authenticity of everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so do that. I also do a spinal alignment and posture correction service as well. And that was kind of something that got me into energy healing to begin with. My grandmother was a color therapist, but she also did, as a child, I'd see people come in and they'd get, their necks and backs with intuition, finding out where there was a misalignment, and also get corrected through either a physical manipulation, like an adjustment, like you'd go and get it at a chiropractor or osteopath. But also I've been to other practitioners that were able to do that energetically, which led to what I'm able to do, where we can do it energetically distantly. So I've got clients all over the world that we work on aligning their spine, correcting their posture, because that's the precursor to why things go out of alignment, or let's say don't hold in place, right? They keep going out of alignment. And also make energy tools, which is where I'll start with in regards to these shapes. Now, these shapes, the interesting thing about that, we're talking about geometry, right? Or sacred geometry. And the interesting thing when we really reflect on it, that and also when we get older and we, if we have children, that we see that one of the first things we learn about is shapes and numbers, right? And kind of take that for granted, but really when we look at reality is based on those things. All right. So another way of calling geometry is form. Okay, it's form. And that's actually, funnily enough, where information comes from, the word, right? So now life is about experience, right? And experience is about taking on information. Okay, so again, that emphasis on form and geometry, shapes. And obviously then our role and what we want to do here to have that purpose in life is we take on that experience, we convert it into wisdom. Okay, and that's what I talk about ourselves as souls and energy. We're not just purely an energy like people go, hey, I've got up and go to go and do anything in the day, right? And run a marathon or whatever. It's not just about that. It's about an energy that has a wisdom to it. Okay, so and this is what really sparks me every day. It's not running marathons, but learning more about my experience, learn more about who I am. which I'm finding that there's no limitation to that, right? So then that's really exciting. So these forms, these geometries, that's where I kind of got part of my beginnings in becoming an energy healer with all those little tools in my tool belt that I was mentioning there before. I got into sacred geometry, especially pyramids, and all sorts of pyramids, the Merkaba, also the Vesica Pisces, right, which is a very interesting geometry in itself.
Yeah, I don't know what that one is. Can you describe? I think so. I've heard you say there's a little bit of you have an accent because you're from there, right? Like, so I think sometimes I'm hearing something, I'm like, okay, is that the same thing?
Yeah.
So you say Merkaba, but I have heard it say the Merkaba star. Is that the same thing, right?
Same thing.
Okay, and that's like, just because we're doing a podcast, let's describe a little bit about that. So that's like almost like the Star of David in 3D form, isn't it?
That's it.
Okay.
I was just about to say that. Yes, Star of David. That's the other name it's given. And quite often it's a geometry that is connected to the word consciousness itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And a Merkaba is actually made up of 2 pyramids, but they are 3-sided pyramids, not 4. Okay. And one kind of points down and one kind of points up. It's to try and explain that. Now, a geometry that's relatively new, which is called a chestahedron, really piqued my interest because it was essentially, an elderly gentleman who was in retirement age that all of a sudden got into geometry in a really big way. He learned about the Platonic solids, and his kind of life mission started for him when he was in his 60s, right? The Platonic solids has got a 6-sided form, which is the cube, and then the 8-sided form is the octahedron. And he was like, well, where's the 7? And they were just like, well, there's no 7. So all of a sudden he took it on himself to figure out, okay, there must be a 7, right? And obviously he was a sculptor artist, and he was a teacher in regards to, artist, right? Art teacher. So he already had that artistic viewpoint of geometry, right? To become a geometrician is what they specialize in. And he took him years and years to figure out this new geometry, which is really like someone inventing a new number. It just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And what he came to find about this geometry, he found that it was the geometry of the heart, especially the left ventricle of the heart. Okay. And the more and more he learned about this geometry, the more he learned about the true authentic nature of the heart. Okay. And from me learning from him, and me then getting a hold of the geometric tool, which is known as the chestahedron, and applying that to my clearing work with my clients, I was learning so much through him, but also through the tool. Now, when people would interview her, they would go, how do you know this, Frank? His name was Frank Chester, hence chestahedron. And because you couldn't find it anywhere on the internet, or there was no books or anything on the chestahedron, it's so new. And he grabbed the tool, which is just made out of metal, right, of the chestahedron form. And he goes, this taught me. Oh. And for a lot of people, they'll be like, well, what do you mean that taught you? Well, the thing is, as I mentioned before, geometry is form, and form is information. So it has a wisdom to it. All these shapes, these geometries, it has a wisdom to it. And so, when you're using something of sacred geometry, or for me, the original format, even before it gets translated into geometry, which is frequencies, it's going to teach you. And this has been my experience as well. So all of a sudden, I got really interested in the heart, big way, because I knew that obviously was a connection with love, with the heart, and that really, for all of us, we might have different pathways to getting there, but eventually, we kind of all want the same thing. We want a life that's full of joy, happiness, peace, love. And, all those things are really a discernment of what is felt It's about feel. And feel is the language of the heart. It's the extension of the heart's feel, okay? And all of a sudden I was realizing, I was like, but as a human, most of the time we're stuck up in our head, and what's actually guiding us is thought, not feel. So all of a sudden I was looking into this, and then all of a sudden that became part of my charts. And when I was doing healings on all sorts of problems, this was coming up.
What do you mean it became part of your charts? When you were doing the postural stuff?
Yeah. So the way I do my healing is I'm a dowser.
Okay.
Right. So to get to that, there's many. You can use a pendulum, you can use divining or dowsing rods, or people use muscle kinesiology. We've all got slightly different ways of doing that, right? And some people are more visual; they see more than the general folk. And so for me, I'm a dowser, and I learned on dowsing rods originally, but then I translated that to a pendulum because I knew you could get semicircle charts that would allow me to kind of diagnose a number of things that we need to work on that client. So that's essentially the charts that I use. And I can show you actually the charts. So for example, a chart like that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to articulate it since we're doing audio. So it's like a semicircle that's got rectangular-ish shapes that go kind of, let's see, it's kind of like a fan.
Yeah, it's like a fan.
There's like options in different places on the fan. Okay, yeah.
Correct. So and then my most favored chart, which you can see it's quite battered, this one, is a alphabet chart. And why I use that the most is I call it my conversation chart, because I have a conversation with my own soul. That's what's guiding the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say our soul is our expansive aspect of ourselves, and also it's our authentic self. Okay, and because it's not kind of being wavered by the world, how it's conditioned us to be or to perceive things. And so it has an ability to see the bigger picture, right? Not kind of get trapped or taken down little routes that kind of take us on.
What you're talking about is like distraction. So that I just had a conversation with somebody about that. It's like the things in life kind of distract you sometimes from the bigger picture. And I just wanted to add in there, you're talking about, connecting to your soul, and the way you were describing it, it really does. It reminds me of like when something's happening in your life and you know that something is off. Why do you know something is off? Because it doesn't align with that part of you, like and so being aware of what is in alignment to that part of you or not, it's really like a bigger awareness of a wiser part of you.
That's it. And for me, that is how something feels.
Yeah.
That for me, that's our greatest discernment. Again, getting back to the heart, right? Is this aspect that, and I always say the seat of our soul is our heart.
Yeah.
It's like, so when my heart is communicating to me, like through, I would say a knowing is the key word there for me.
Yeah.
And it's simple because the heart knows simplicity. A lot of the times we get very, as you say, we kind of get distracted through the complexity of the mind and its thoughts.
Yeah.
I have so many people that come to me and they go, "Hey, Chris, okay, I might not see your camera on your charts while you're dowsing, but you're getting answers super quick. You're dowsing on a chart that's got letters on it, and you're getting words and sentences within seconds." And I go, "That's because what I find a name what I use is dowsing, right? In regards to dowsing, is usually because we're trying to control the process because we're doing it from the mind and its thoughts. And sometimes when we just drop and fall into our heart, then again, we just enable that simplicity, and we allow and surrender ourselves to that guidance, and it just comes out effortlessly.
Yeah. So I'm actually in a channeling class now, and as I'm doing that, I'm recognizing more that I've been able to do that before, and I've done it before, just didn't have all this formality around it. But I lead a meditation group, and we do it several times a week. And, basically you become friends with the people who are there. And so you kind of listen to what's going on with them because it's always connected to you. And I hear repeatedly, which is very common, people questioning that part. And I know that experience. Of course, I've done it too, but I would say, when you do go into that heart space and you do go into the feeling of things, all the other chatter, which I still experience on a regular basis, just take a deep breath and allow it to talk, but just put it in the background or something.
So
when you get into that heart space, it does just quiet, and then you can get the real answer. And it usually is that short, to the point, it could be just one word.
Yeah. There's a common expression, what you're talking about there is to get to the heart of the matter, right? We've just got the word heart in there, right? So just get to the heart of the matter. Don't worry about the superficial stuff. Let's just get to the core, the origin of the thing. And yeah, for sure. And I think, also what you're explaining there is when we quieten everything out is a meditative state, right? And this is something I talk to my clients about, is this aspect that, meditation is deemed a practice. And where you have to go away and go and do it, right?
Yeah.
For me is like, as I mentioned earlier, I like to take something and run with it, evolve with it. And I look at that and I go, yeah, that's great. You can do that. You can go and do a meditation. But what about if you're busy for that day and you don't get to the meditation, and all of a sudden you notice people start to beat themselves up and they're like, oh, I don't feel good because I don't get to my meditation. We kind of become dependent to that practice. Now, for me is, again, we're going to use that word, to get to the heart of the matter of what meditation, what enables us to get there to that meditative state, which actually is our natural state of being, is because when we drop into the heart, that's the state of being. Now, is that there's two core principles to meditation, right? And one is generally we remove our attention off the distraction, right? To come back to that word you mentioned earlier. So that's why a lot of the meditation, they'll get you to close your eyes, right? And then the second one is, quite often meditation practice, they'll say to focus on your breath. And for me, that is to bring your awareness back to self, bring your self-awareness back. So when you take those two principles and apply it to your every moment way of living, your lifestyle, then all of a sudden you provide a more sustainable way of applying what was once a practice, but now is a way of being.
Yes.
And I'm all about trying to keep things as simple as possible, and also getting something that can be sustained. Because humanity generally has a sustainability problem on all facets.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's because we generally try and put something together through the complexity of the pathway we use to perceive and process everything from mind thought, when really we need to drop into the heart and apply things that are more in alignment with that pathway of getting into the heart, which is then presenting a state that supports us, not working against us all the time. So again, that connection of the heart, so important. A lot of my work is based around that. It's based around trying to connect that client back into their authenticity, trying to get them back into the heart, because all of a sudden things get more simple, as you say, the mind chatter, right? That's always going to be there. One thing we need to know is we need to know that, yes, it's there, but I don't necessarily have to apply my attention and my intention towards it, which means to feed that for more of that comes through.
I think feed is the key word, because if you're trying to lessen the intensity of a frequency, you can't do it by completely avoiding it, and you can't do it by basically berating it, right? Like you have to just give your attention somewhere else. So you're kind of sucking away the frequencies that are going towards it. You've got to just redirect them.
Yeah. Well, our tap, the tap of manifestation, never turns off, right? So for me, it's not an aspect of let's work on being able to manifest. Everyone's doing it all the time. Yeah. It's more about being aware where your creative energy is going to,
yes,
and what it's going to create. And for me, that's why, being in the heart's so important, because it emphasizes your self-awareness, which means you become more aware of the choices in which where your energy is going to,
So
right? So you can
it's really
funnel it
interesting.
into the areas that your heart desires, right? The things that you do want more.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I do have a degree in art, but that's not, I'm just saying that so that people understand that I have extensive experience in creating things, right?
Yeah.
So when you're studying art like that, and I think this is why the man that you're talking about, Chester, that's his last name or his first name?
Yeah, that's his last name. Correct.
Okay. So why he was able to get there, because kind of what you're talking about, and in many different ways, is addressing the creative process, I'm going to say, because the creative process is essentially, you have to really, what you have to do now, I know, you go into the heart, like you open up.
Yeah.
And in addition to the fact that usually creative people are more okay with mistakes than people who have restriction around creativity, because to be creative, you just go in there and you try it. And if you mess it up, really the best thing to do is like, oh, well, how do I fix that? And then you're open again, right? You're trying to figure out, what is it that I do now next, that I've got this thing that I don't really like, which is the same thing as creativity. But you do have to go into that open state. And actually, as I was getting my degree, you have to do these things called critiques, which is like, you have a day of projects due, and then we all sit around and kind of like talk about, how does it look, and did it accomplish the goal, or what's the feeling of it, or whatever. And it causes, doing that process causes you to pay attention to what's there. So during a critique, you would say like the circle shape in the top right corner. Now, what I've learned after that is that a lot of people are not comfortable saying, here's this thing that I observe in this location, this is how it feels. Like, they just don't even want to talk about that. I just want to go straight to whatever their patterns are. But if you can talk about that, that's kind of pulling your attention to what's there in front of you. And then you have to talk about how you feel, how does the image come across? Why does it come across like that? And it's very similar to the meditative state that you're talking about, because it is being aware. And also over, like, when I first, I've looked up the word meditation. What I understand meditation by definition to be is simply to be thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
So are we thinking? Yes, we're thinking about things all the time. So I remember feeling, I think there's this overwhelming, I think as humans, we think we learn, we're raised to believe there's a certain way of doing things. But when we don't do them right, like we think we're doing meditation wrong, right? You can't get it wrong unless you don't do it, right? So what I decided early on, before I got into any of this stuff, is I was trying to heal. My husband had died, okay? And I'm listening to all these people talk. All of the answers are meditation from everybody everywhere, okay? Like, okay, well, let's try to do this. So eventually I just kept listening to it over and over. And I think it was Deepak Chopra said something one time, and I was like, oh, I've been meditating my whole life and didn't know it, And it didn't have to be in this position, and it didn't have to be, doing it a certain way. It was just, getting to the space that you're talking about.
Yep.
Being present with it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think these, when we're talking about spirituality, we're talking consciousness work, which, a lot of people in that field then know about meditation, or that might be a entry point into that. And there's kind of a conventional kind of image things have, which is, for me, is very superficial.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as you say, with meditation, if you say the meditation to someone, they're already visualizing sitting on the ground, cross-legged, and going, oh, and that's really, not really what meditation is about. Because for one person's meditation might be going for a walk. One person might be in the garden getting their hands in the soil and being grounded. One person might be walking through nature, like a forest or along the beach. So it might be one person that is playing squash, and all they're focusing on is running after that ball on a squash court. So, it's going to be different for everybody. It's more a sense of presence, a presentness, that it's providing. And so, for me, meditation is about providing a state of being, a meditative state. And that is simply letting go of the control of the mind and its thoughts, which then allow you to fall into your heart. And that expression of fall into your heart is the same as the fall in love.
Right. Yeah.
Because love comes from the heart, right? So, and there are certain people that will come in your life that have that ability to trigger your ability to fall into your heart. And a lot of people will focus all their attention on that person and say, hey, they love me, this is the love I'm feeling. But a lot of times in that situation, the love you're actually feeling is just more of your authenticity coming through, because you're allowing, keyword there is allow, your heart to open. So for me, meditation's about the heart. Meditation's about feel. And this is why the opposing polarity, mind and its thoughts, start to just silent away, just goes, they just start to fade away, right? And everything quietens. Because sometimes when we start to talk about distraction, that distraction can be that aspect of just mind chatter, thoughts all the time. And that's what you hear from people that are trying to do meditation and can't get to a meditative state, because what they see meditation out of doing from up here, but meditation is actually the thing that wants to get rid of that and get you into the heart, into a state of being. So meditation, you won't be able to successfully get to a meditative state out of doing. Right. And that's why a lot of people don't get to that space, right, of a meditative state, because they're trying to do it through doing instead of realizing actually the shift that needs to take place through that is to get out of doing and get into being, which is more
being. That's what I was thinking. And when I said I realized I was doing it all the time. You said several examples, but I just want to add to those. So like being creative, if you enjoy making something, you just like in the zone, right? Like you're in your place or whatever it is you do. My son gets lost in his own world, in his mind. But for me, the part that really nailed it was I remember being in high school and riding my bike a lot. And my friends would give me a hard time because I would do it every day for like an hour or more, right? And they would harass me, and I would say I'm absorbing. So I'm just kind of like pushing off like the silliness or the attack or whatever. But in truth, that is exactly what it is. It's like you're being completely present, and then whatever is happening, you're just experiencing it. And I don't know if you've heard of this book, and I actually haven't actually read the whole book, but I did see Bruce Lipton in person, and I bought the book because I really like the ideas behind it. But he has that book called The Honeymoon Effect. And essentially what you're talking about in terms of falling in love, it's really just, like you said, getting in alignment with yourself and then remembering, essentially you love yourself more than anybody could possibly know. It's allowing yourself to be there. And in that moment, you're kind of in the now. So you're totally aware of what's going on. You're not worried about the future or the past. And it's kind of being there and breathing present. So it's very similar to being meditating, be meditating.
It is. Well, you're talking about a state of love.
Yes.
You're passionate and you're in love with what you're doing at the time, which I don't really like to say the word doing, right? Because being, right? So, it's all about love. That's what life's all about, is about, spending more moments, about what you love, which means then your energy, your creative power energy is going into creating or manifesting more of the thing that you love, right? And that's what it's all about. And sometimes, if we're creating, when we're kind of caught up in our thoughts, caught up in the head and the mind, that all of a sudden a lot of our energy gets distracted towards the worries, the concerns, the fears, which then means our energy is then going into creating more of those, right? So, it's like my son, he's really into drums at the moment, and you look at him when he's in drums and he's just in the zone, right? That's another word, that's quite often used in sport, right? People will go, when they're playing really well, you can just see that in Vince sports, they'll go, they're in the zone. Well, that's them being very present. There's nothing interfering, right? There's no complexity of mind thoughts, or what have we got to do in 5 minutes time, or what was I doing yesterday? None of that's all about completely being present. And for me, then that brings whatever field that you work in or you do brings out your true highest potential.
Yeah. So tell me, how does getting into that space, then how do you explain getting into that space? You're interested in this chesterhedron, so that's a vehicle through which you can get more into the zone. So tell me, what's the experience of, you say, learning from the geometry? Like you were saying that he had learned it from that, and you obviously have done that too. So tell me more about that experience. Like, what is that experience where you're getting in the zone, you're really enjoying this, and you're learning from that geometry?
Yeah. It was very much connected to what I mentioned before, right? I take something and I like to run with it, right? It's like, okay, because for me, I'm not interested in limitation. I'm not interested in hitting a ceiling. I'm interested in learning new things all the time, right? And they could be things that I'm experiencing on a day-to-day occurrence. It's not like I'm having to fly somewhere else or another country. I need to experience something else. No, it's about living simply, and it's about like let's get more to the heart of the matter of these things that I'm experiencing moment to moment, day to day, and learning something new about them, right? Learning more about them, right? So as I connect further into me, I connect further more into everything else around me, right? So then I start to realize that all my experiences I'm having through other people and I are all opportunities for me to learn more and grow, So and that's a really great place to be at, right? And when you can, then perceive your experience, your life, your reality in that way. So with the geometry, being form and, hence information, then it's my role then to take that information and convert it into wisdom. And if people out there are wondering, well, what do you mean by that? Is that, I always say that we live in a time right now, especially because of the internet, there are infinite sources of information out there. But what I'm generally seeing out there is that there's infinite sources of information, but humanity are conflicted and confused as much as ever. And that's because it misses that greater insight that gives you an understanding of what it truly represents. What's its purpose at the heart of that very thing? And that's what we then gain when we convert that experience into wisdom. As we realize, yes, I'm learning that, I'm taking that information on, but I have a greater sense of what it teaches me, what it really is, and why it is part of my reality. Okay? So this is what led to me really becoming a reality coach, right? And that's why I use the word reality, because I know a lot of people use the word life coach. Mm-hmm. And that's why I use that, because for me, we're a creator. We've got creative processes happening moment to moment. And so we are creating what our reality becomes. So for us to understand what reality is all about is also to support that person's creative process. Okay. And not to kind of get stuck in the little traps that are laid there out in reality. That then means your creative process and your energy goes into places that it was never supposed to go to, right? And within session work, we call those miscreations. And quite often it's led when we get stuck up here. When we drop back into the heart, then we can get back on track, so to speak. So with the, like the chesterhedron, these forms, right, these geometries, I all of a sudden wanted to know more of its origin, its authenticity, right? And I was like, okay, this is a geometry. And, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, that, as kids, we learn numbers and shapes first, right? So it's numerology and geometry. So I was like, okay, but I was realizing that the original format that then became numerology, then became geometry, was frequencies. So all of a sudden, I was looking at frequencies and I was seeing that this is formless energy frequencies that then when it becomes part of reality, it gets converted into formed creation. Okay, and that's when the translation happened in regards to geometry. Okay, because the thing is, when we perceive our reality, we're using visible sight, and we know that visible sight only sees 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum of light, which means that it's not even close to 1% that we can see of this reality.
Well,
So
technically, it's also that percentage of what we can measure with our equipment.
that's it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I always say to my clients, I say, when you really, really look at it as humans, what are we using to discern our life, our reality most of the time? What we see, couple it up with a thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And straight away I'll say to them, so hence we're using our limitations. Those are quite limited aspects of our senses, right? Mm-hmm. This is why getting in the heart's so important, right? That intuition, because what I found was there's no limitations applied to the heart.
Yeah.
Out of feel. Okay. So all of a sudden I was looking into this, and so that took me into another place of understanding that, you know, how you mentioned earlier, I started with these geometric tools, and all of a sudden realized I didn't need them. Yeah. And this was the point where I started to get into the precursor to geometry, which is frequencies itself. And I realized that when we open our heart, we facilitate more of ourself as the soul, as a consciousness. It's us facilitating more frequencies, okay, which then become the translations of the geometries we all know about. So all of a sudden, instead of seeing that this tool I was holding was what I needed, very much like when somebody uses pendulum dowsing, they go, oh yeah, the pendulum's got the power in it. No, it's not. We realize it's just an extension of the power you hold within yourself. It's just about facilitating it. And a lot of the times, because we're so conditioned, hardwired to be very visual about things, that's why sometimes we have to start with those physical, tangible things to get us going. But once we get going, we realize actually, oh no, this is just a training wheel.
Yes.
An extension of my own power. So all of a sudden, when I realized about how I could facilitate all these frequencies, that all these geometries we know about that comes through me, then I realized that all of a sudden my job or purpose as a intuitive ascendance quantum healer, reality coach, is to get more of my clients connecting into their expansion, connecting into their soul more, that bring through all those energetics. So all of a sudden, that took me into another technology that I create tools with, and we call that tensor technology. Okay, and tensor tools were originally brought forth by a guy called Slim Spurling in the early 90s, about 1991. And essentially what it is, it's using copper wire, where you take a length of copper wire, you bend it back on itself, and then you put it into a drill, and you get the drill to spin, and it twists the wire. You get that line of twisted wire, and you cut it to a specific measurement, which they call in that community a cubit, C-U-B-I-T. And obviously that's connected and associated with mathematics as well, the word qubit. And also geometry, because it's a sacred measurement, like sacred geometry. Then what you do with that line, you then make it into a loop, and you bring the ends back on itself, and you solder or braze or weld those two ends together to create a closed loop. Then all of a sudden you've got a tensor ring, what they call a tensor ring. Now that tensor ring, because of it, the qubit measurement is the important aspect of it, because what that will become now is a physical anchor that allows frequencies through it, through that space within that closed loop. Okay, so all of a sudden I was like, okay, I want a technology that is not about a translation anymore, right, which is the geometry, but more about bringing through the original format, which is frequencies itself.
Oh, okay.
And what I did with my tensor technology is I was getting intuitively guided through certain measurements to make tensor rings or tensor products that brought forth more of that client's consciousness through the heart. So again, they are training wheels, but they're training wheels not in providing that person with energy that exists outside of them, but more about bringing through more of what they already have.
So when somebody uses the tensor technology that you have, okay, the ring, let's just say the ring.
Yeah.
When they use that, I'm assuming that you can tell us this. What does it feel like? So, okay, first I want to say what you were just describing, especially with the tools, is, as you learn, like I'm learning per se, I'm putting quotes, air quotes here, learning to channel. Really what I'm doing is learning more specifically what different feelings, I'm putting words to different feelings. So like, yes, I think yesterday we did a class and we're practicing channeling, and there's somebody in the room there who can sense, or he's aware of what is happening with the channeling. Like, is your connection weak? Are you in your head? Like what kind of method are you using to get your information? So we're practicing that, and he can kind of tell. And so he'll just speak up at the time. He'll say, okay, your connection is a little off, or you're too in your head, or he'll say something, right? So when he says things to me, I already know that I'm off, because I have a tendency sometimes to go into my head, and then it turns into this frankly annoying conversation in my head. And so I, kind of have to just experience, okay, because some of mine is I actually get thoughts, which sometimes sound like they sound like conversation. And as we all know, you can have stream of consciousness where, 15 minutes later, you're on a totally different tangent. But I can recognize sometimes when those thoughts, they just feel different. Like they just feel, frankly, I mean, this word I would say is it's kind of annoying. It's like this annoying person that won't stop talking. It's like that monkey mind. And so if I do a practice that kind of gets me back into the heart, then and as I have experienced in this channeling class, when I do that, then I've got the connection again, right? So the tools that you were talking about, learning to use a pendulum. I've done a little bit with the pendulum, and I saw exactly what you saw. And of course, I think a lot of logical people would say, okay, if you're holding this stone or whatever it is at the end of this chain, you've got these little micro movements in your hand. You're still moving, you're breathing, that kind of thing. Well, of course that has an impact. But if you watch somebody actually use it, it's like muscle testing. Sure, my muscles are going to tense up a certain way, but they tense up differently when you say something different, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, what does it feel like? Does it feel like just using a tool, like they just get familiar with what the frequency feels like? Or
yeah, for sure. What you generally feel when you I'm wearing a lot of the tensor rings and tensor products we make pendants.
Okay.
And why we make pendants is because, well, they're inexpensive, right? Because they're not using as much time and material for me to make them. Mm-hmm. So it's more affordable for more people, but also you can wear them 24 hours, 7 days a week, which means they're working on your field more often than not. Now, so I'll just show you there, Blair, but they're made up of rings. This is that silver we've used actually with these ones. We make some of them out of silver, give them a little bit more of a cosmetic appeal to them for some people that like silver instead of copper. And so when somebody wears, let's say, a pendant like this, which are made of this tensor technology, tensor rings, quite often, they will feel more grounded. Okay, this is something that we hear a lot. And they feel more peaceful. They feel more at ease with themselves, right? Because these are all qualities that we get when we were just talking about earlier about meditative state, about when we drop into our heart, which we provide a state of being, right? So because we're presenting more of ourselves, which means that will make us feel more at home or at ease with ourselves. Because really, we see a world out there that there's a lot of conflict out there, but the conflict doesn't exist out there. The conflict exists within the individual, and then they project that out into reality. So that conflict is really about us not being connected into our authenticity enough, right? Because if we're more in the head, we're disconnecting away from our authenticity. No wonder we're feeling conflicted, about ourselves. Now, so this is what we generally feel when people wear these types of products with the tensor technology, is that they will feel more at peace, feel more at ease with self, feel calmer. Because I deal with a lot of people with anxiety and those sorts of things, panic attacks, those sorts of things. And I can explain exactly what's happening at that moment, right? Because when somebody's having a panic attack or anxiety, their auric field shuts down, it collapses on them. This is why, it's like you're in a room and all four walls of the room are caving in on you. No wonder you're getting panicky. Okay, but when we get someone, as I say, these tensor products are about bringing through more of that person's light or energy, which comes through the heart. So it's about getting them more into the heart. And what we tend to find, why they feel more at peace and ease and feel more grounded, is because their auric field is expanding out, and continually expanding out. It's a bit like, the symbol, coming back into a symbol, I guess, a geometry, is the infinity symbol, right? So the infinity symbol, in the middle of it, there's a cross, right? And then it creates these two loops on the outside. Now, the way that I look at it is our heart is that singularity, that cross in the middle of an infinity symbol. Now, one of the loops is your consciousness that exists within you on a quantum level. And as long as your heart's open, you can get it through there. That creates the other loop on the other side of the infinity symbol, which then becomes your auric field, right? So see your heart as kind of that veil in the middle of it, right? So the more we open our heart, the more we bring through more of what already exists within us. We're just tapping into it. And then that then becomes represented here while we have this experience here, this human experience. So I even created this is where, there's quite a few people that make tensor technology out there, but a lot of them are following people like Slim Spurling that, originated this technology and using qubits that have been around for a very long time. Where for me, we don't use those qubits. The qubits that are all measurements that I have been intuitively guided, that are connected to a lot of the things I'm working with every day with clients, with health problems, manifestation problems, even relationship problems. And so I created a map, which I call the Ascension map, which is a map that depicts our expansion as a consciousness.
Yes, I remember.
And I'll show you, Blair, there. So it's there, and it's depicted in the shape of a tree, right? Isn't that interesting? Because we know about the tree of life. We know in Norse mythology or history, the way you want to look at it, the Yggdrasil tree. So and we talk about a lot of people in the spirituality consciousness community talk about, I want to be grounded more. And isn't it interesting, right? Because trees, what are they? They're grounded, right? The roots are in the soil, in the earth. And, our consciousness is that. So for me, is grounding, the ultimate ground is to have an open heart. And just like I said, there's that example earlier about, hey, meditation as a practice is you've got to keep up with it, right? You've got to make time for it. You've got to be dependent on it. But let's just get to the heart of the matter and then use the principles so we don't become dependent on something.
Yeah.
Same with grounding, right? Grounding's great. I'd love to go running around barefoot all day but in all reality, we can't do that. Whether it's the weather's, it's snowing outside and we can't be outside for too long, or we're in an office, we're in a building, we've got jobs, we're working. So for me, it's about, okay, how can we create that grounding effect for everybody? It doesn't matter what situation they're in. And what we've come to find is that our ultimate ground, even before getting back on the earth, is to open our heart.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing, what's amazing to me is we call opening our heart, dropping and surrendering the heart, our natural state, a natural state of being. And finally, for majority of people, when we go into nature, right, natural nature sound quite similar. Nature is a remembrance of our own natural state, because when we go into nature, why it feels so good is because it generally allows you to surrender those the thoughts, and drop into the heart and be grounded.
So I want to touch on something. Honestly, I'm only continuing this right now because we're doing a podcast. I think ideally it would be better for people to pause. So I'm going to say, if you're listening to this, you should pause this and think about what he just said. But as we continue recording, I want to bring this into the physical world. You use the example of having a panic attack, and I have had 2 panic attacks in my life, and it was a really interesting experience. Of course, it was not enjoyable. Anybody who's ever had that knows it's horrible. But what I find really interesting about it is, I definitely would say it definitely feels like you're going way, way so far into your head that you just reality is not there. Like your reality is whatever it is you're thinking about. And what I find really interesting about that is the dramatic effect that it has on somebody's physical body. Because when you're having a panic attack, by definition, you've got a racing heart, you're having trouble breathing, it's like, there's no way to deny this is a physical response in the body.
Right.
And so I think it's just an exaggerated version of what we experience as humans, where, let's say, I'm just going to say, we have emotions, but it's the thoughts that seem to, because they're so restrictive, it's almost like that is almost what, not only thoughts, but I think it has a huge impact on dis-ease.
It does. Correct. Yeah. Because the thing is, I'm glad you used the word dis-ease, because weren't we just talking about feeling at ease before, right? Which is peace, right? Mm-hmm. So the opposite to ease is unease, which another way of saying unease is dis-ease. Mm-hmm. Right? So when we talk about being in the heart, we feel at ease. Well, the opposite end of that is not being in the heart, being up in our head, mm-hmm. right? And then we're at unease. We could see it as an unbalanced state, mm-hmm. and then when we drop in the heart, everything balances out, right? A balanced state. So you're right, in regards to panic attacks, anxiety, there's all these physiological changes, which is then being experienced in the physical for sure. Mm-hmm. And I always like to say to my clients, I don't like to say it's in the physical. I like to say it's in the perceived physical.
Yeah. Because is it how we're perceiving it?
Yeah, because based on what we can see and mm-hmm. all these sorts of senses, right, that are involved there. And I always say, with something like that, as I was mentioning, our auric field collapses in. Now, what happens is when client comes and sees me, when we see they've got a really diminished or collapsed auric field, it usually means that they are extending their creative process, their energy, into things that then only hold power over them. Mm-hmm. And what that means is their power is things outside that field that then chokes their own field off. Yeah. Right?
So they're kind of creating that to happen. So they're making it worse. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because they're more up here. Mm-hmm. And when we're up here, we tend to lose our self-awareness, which means then we lose our awareness of where our energy and our creative power is going to. So a lot of times then it goes into things that are not supporting us, they're working against us. And then all of a sudden that's when that phenomena happens, right? And then that will be the causative aspect. that then cause to the effect. And the effect is then what we're experiencing as what we call our physiology, right? As you mentioned, high heart rate and all the things that we then see as part of those processes in the body. You know, my soul always says when it comes to health problems, you know, on the body, the physical body, is that our body is only as good as the state or environment we provide it. It never said an environment that's around you that's disconnected from you. It's the environment you provide yourself. Now, so what that essentially means is that becomes the precursor to then how the body will express itself, which means the symptoms, right? Because again, the way that we've been hardwired to interpret symptoms is just so far off track of what symptoms really are, right? Symptoms are messengers, they're not the problem, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, you know, there's a problem just in that, because that means we're misinterpreting and misunderstanding the body, which really, the body is always communicating to us for the purpose to be our ally, to help.
Mm-hmm.
But we vilify it because we don't understand really what a symptom is.
Mm-hmm.
So this precursor then, you know, influences how the body expresses itself, symptoms, how it will behave in relevance to its relationship with the microbes in and on the body, as well as how it ultimately functions. So, and generally people try and work and treat that on that effect level without really working or knowing about the causative aspect to that effect. And so for me is like, if we run down that rabbit hole where we're chasing the effect aspect, those symptoms, no wonder we get so conflicted and confused in what we're doing. Because when we go back to the causative aspect, then all of a sudden it's a lot simpler. It's always simpler.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And why that is because when we're up here, it will only perceive the effect aspect, and it want you to chase the effect aspect. But when we drop into the heart, it provides, as I say, like I said before, we've got infinite sources of information, but we lack the understanding of what it represents, those greater insights. To gain those greater insights, to see the cause to the effect, and hence work at it there, we need to be in the heart. We need to drop into the heart, right? To get to the heart of the matter.
As you say that, it makes me understand that we talk about as humans is evolving. Okay, I don't know. We're just going to go off the deep end, but for some people, we'll see what they say. But there's this idea that there's other life forms and other places in the universe or wherever they are, right? And their frequencies are much higher, and they're much better at manipulating their frequencies. What I'm hearing you say is that the ability for humans to evolve to be better at managing their frequencies is the key, is to go into the heart, because there's so much more ability for us to, when we're in that state, to perceive other frequencies that we cannot perceive with the mind or with the eyes or any other facet that we have. So we're able to open up to those frequencies, and then actually, like you're talking about, learning from the geometry, actually learn from them to be able to do that. So it almost says that's the key to ascension, really, is to go into
it is. The key to ascension is actually facilitating every aspect of you to be represented here.
Okay.
Right? So for me, it's not even ascending up to the stars. It's about ascending what exists on a quantum level within you and bringing it up to the surface, and the surface is the heart.
Okay. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So the quantum, is when everything gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So I always see the heart, we see the heart as this organ that has a rhythm and a rate to it. And we must understand that is from a limited, our limited faculties of how we perceive that, right? We're seeing really a less than 1% representation of it, right? So, but in its true, authentic nature, the whole 100%, what is the heart? And what we find is the heart is actually like a doorway.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, it's like a veil between worlds, right? And behind that doorway is this quantum aspect of you, this expansive aspect of you that is then shared and spliced over multi-realities and multi-universes. This is how expansive you really are. Now, if you're up in the mind's not going to tell you that. It wants you to stay limited, right? But when you get into the heart, and this is where, sadly, I think humanity's kind of, why they're going down the AI path is because they believe they need something of a high intelligence to guide its process, when really we're not even touching on our potential because we're using the wrong pathway to get there.
Yes.
Okay. It's other intelligence that comes through here is kind of manipulating us to believe that we are limited, and hence we will welcome it instead of actually realizing what we are and more of ourselves is not through here, it's through the heart. And these cues everywhere, even in science, right? In science, the electromagnetic field of the heart is the most expansive aspect of ourselves, much more, thousands of times more expansive in regards to the brain.
Yeah.
But then, Blair, it just shocks me because when I go on Google and I type consciousness or this sort of thing, I see pictures of heads, brains. It's like, come on, people. It's like the electromagnetic field is so much more expansive than that. And that is a limited heart. Generally, a lot of people have got closed off hearts and it's still beating the brain, right? So again, for me, is this exploration of our infinite potential, because when we use the heart, we open the heart, we use a heart feel pathway of discernment instead of mind thought, we actually realize that now we are investing our energy into infinite possibility, where when we're up here, it's more into probability, which is a loop, just more of the same. And that's when we get stuck.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to ask if you would be willing to continue the conversation, because there's so much more in here. And I just want to say that my next question is, how do we connect the emotions to that, right? Because even if we just take a simple panic attack, I would assume, I haven't had that many and I'm not a doctor, I don't get all into that, but I know for me that the beginning of those panic attacks all started with thoughts it really started with a feeling, right? But then the thoughts that came as a result of that. So I know that there's a huge basis of even whatever is accepted in the world as all dis-ease has a foundation in emotion, right? Because it's a frequency. So I would love to address that at some point.
Yeah, for sure. Well,